English translation 918th contact Saturday, 27th September 2025, 11:45 HRS.
Here I am again, Edward. Greetings, dear friend. Once again, Florina, and I would like to thank you, because the conversation with you was very helpful and very valuable for us. To this we think, which is our common thought, that we probably would not have heard better words if we had spoken to our friends in our circle of acquaintances.
That is all right, Brahmanda. I could just speak from my own experience, although I had to deal with it alone in Algeria and India. But welcome and greetings.
I know that, and it was certainly difficult for you. In Jenna, she's back to Era for 2 weeks, is also facing the same problem, which is why she came to you, and then told me that your words helped her a lot, for which she is also very grateful.
Yes, that cannot be changed, I mean this problem. You will apparently, I mean that you will be much older than we Earthlings, 10 times or even more, so it's simply rarer than with us. Well, but you apparently have the same problems as we do.
That is so, the reality and truth cannot be denied.
I think so too. Funny you should say that, because regarding reality and truth, I wrote a new poem, and it is this one that I still have on my computer.
Reality and truth.
If you live as a good human being, even if you are also inconspicuous, then always fulfill your duty. Teach the reality and also the full truth that you know, and make it known openly at all times. SSSC 25.9 2025 841 HRS Billy.
But to what you say, you are human beings like us Earthlings, and there is probably no difference in this respect. Human beings are just human beings. For my part, I was confronted with this very early on in my life, and then again and again. It was easier for me to deal with what did not directly affect me personally. I mean, what did not happen in my personal environment, than with what really affected me personally twice in Algeria and India. The other, which was foreign and is with you right up to the present, when Svath has already taught me that I simply block my thoughts, but sometimes the memories do come, especially when I should be asleep. But if I have slept for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, then I lie awake and then the memories and thoughts come, and they are stressful, but I do not want to talk about them because I do not want to burden others with them. But if I'm going to talk about it, then I can also say what you and I have experienced together as reality and truth, and why I also wrote the saying. Namely, what you and I, Bernadette gave me an article from the newspaper Uncut News. CH, September 19, 2025, which says exactly what you and I have heard. Here, this article is it. If you want to read it briefly, please.
It is only short, after all, I have plenty of time, because I have to get back to my duty. Hitzel is also coming here, because he wants to talk to you today. Then I want to.
US journalist in Donbass. Reality contradicts Western media reports Uncut News. CH September 19, 2025.
The American journalist Pearson Sharp traveled with a delegation to the Donbass region and describes impressions that he says fundamentally contradict the portrayals of Western media. Sharp spoke to numerous locals in Horlivka and elsewhere. They said they felt liberated and did not want to return to Ukraine under any circumstances. They had been terrorized under President Zelensky and the Ukrainian army and now felt safer for the first time. In conversation with the acting Donetsk leader Denis Pushilin, Sharp also got the impression that Western reporting was distorting the reality in Donbass. The rest of the world needs to know this, he emphasized to the Russian news agency RIA Novosti. Alongside Sharp, former U.S. Congresswoman Cynthia M. C. Kinney was also part of the delegation. She called for billionaire George Soros to be held accountable for his role in organizing protest movements and attempting to overthrow unpopular governments worldwide. Soros had instrumentalized migration as a weapon and manipulated political processes in the USA by creating a false public opinion. M.C. Kinney described him as a master of chaos who deliberately seeks to overthrow democratically elected governments.
This corresponds exactly to what we too were told by the locals there in response to our questions, but unfortunately this article says nothing about what the locals in Kiev, in Bielizikwa and Grozny told us, namely that their entire state leadership is corrupt and their leader is a warmonger and a liar who does everything he can to keep the war going and therefore does not want to bring about peace.
I actually wanted to keep that to myself, that we too.
You should not hide that, just as you should not also hide the fact that we are in Gaza.
Stop, please. Do not say anything more, and better listen to what I have written here, which I have also put in Citation 4 from September.
This also concerns the FIGU.
The American dictator Trump has accused the Antifa thinkers of being terrorist organizations that have existed since around 1980 and are constantly gaining more followers and becoming groups and organizations because their ideology is contrary to his personality, which is exactly what Antifa advocates. But he will dictatorially go even further than just accusing them of being terrorist organizations because they are in their repertoire contrary to his really extremely evil machinations. So he will go much further before the end of this month, as Bermuda and I found out in a time jump, because he wants to form a military elite that will work for him, which he will call a kind of military intervention against the interior, or something like that, and by also being able to carry this out and put it into practice, he can strengthen and secure his crazy dictatorship power. This, however, his lowly intelligence supporters will not realize, while the rest of America is asleep and will do nothing against this dictator and just let him have his way, as it has let him have so far. Whereas, the term Antifa actually means anti-fascist, whereby self-thinking human beings who, according to their own self-image, are consistently against all neo-Nazism and thus against all forms of Nazi thinking and Nazi behavior, as well as strictly against anti-Semitism, right-wing extremist ideologies, racism and white supremacy, xenophobia, ethnic nationalism, right-wing historical revisionism, fascism, and authoritarianism. The self-thinking and behavior of FIGO members is also related to this, but this is even more extensive in terms of the rejection of false forms of government and their repertoire than among the organized actual Antifa supporters. So everything that corresponds to the following and what is to be called the following falls under this: dictatorship, rulership and slavery, patriarchy, ochlocracy, oligarchy, tyranny, monocracy, lobbyocracy, critarchy, hierocracy, clubocracy, exarchy, sadism, epistocracy, ecclesiarchy, oppression, power-grabbing, domestic violence as well as also Galt, autocracy, genital mutilation, despotism, cyber violence, extremism politics, bureaucracy, psychological violence, coercion and war, stifling of freedom, terror, hierarchy, menarchy, androcracy, anarchy, kleptocracy, kakistocracy, etc.
It would be good and correct if you would talk about what we saw together and got to hear from various locals when we...
No, I do not agree with that because I think...
Your point. I did not think of that.
Then I will make my points when you come here and dictate our conversation.
I agree with that, but now I have to go and do my duty. Besides, Quetzal will be here in a few minutes. So goodbye, dear friend, and see you again soon.
Well then. Take care and goodbye. Take care.
Saturday, September 27th, 2025, 12:43 HRS.
Hello, Edward. Do not be startled. I greet you.
I do not see any reason to, because it has only been 2 or 3 minutes since Brahmanda left. She told me you would be here in a few minutes.
Yes, and here I am, because I have the following to tell you, which you do.
Sure, I would be daft if I...
All your life you have been confronted with this again and again, with your life being sought after several times, also by, as you know.
Unfortunately, I only found out about some of that later. But that is history for me, and it is all over now.
It is. But we have now, after years of work, fathomed everything down to the last detail, and very precisely. Consequently, we have been able to research everything exactly through time manipulations in the times of your life in the past. The main work in this regard was done by Arlian and 2 of his co-workers, who uncover the very unpleasant things that were done to you in your youth. This is surprising to us, because the fact that you put up with all the intrigue and did not fight back.
That is what I tried to do as the little brat I was back then, but could not do anything about it, nor could my parents, who were simply silenced and also put down. Once you have clarified everything, you will also know that something must have happened before my father was born, namely with my grandfather, and that we Meier were called Schlotterlig. Bernadette's note, Schlotterlig equals swear word insult, because of him, and not a day went by without it being shouted at us maliciously. Mrs. Horrott was a class act in this respect and also teamed up with Rita Pavoni, who was about 18 at the time, lived outside on Kasernenstrasse, and who would often pass or ambush me and beat me up, together with Horrott and 3 teenagers who were about 12 to 14 years old, but whom I did not know.
We also saw this in our investigations. But the real reason for the hatred towards you by this Mrs. Horrott was that, as we managed to find out, you answered her when you were just over 4 years old that you did not want to know about the invented Savior, and ran away when she asked you if you prayed beautifully to the Savior every day. That is why she got angry and started to ambush you every day, also together with the young woman who was actually called Rita Pavoni, who also belonged to the same sective, through the fanatical believer Mrs. Horrott, like many others who became convinced sect followers through Mrs. Horrott, with 17 persons continuing to belong to the Catholic or Protestant Church to deceive neighbors and relatives, so as not to be branded as sectarians, because the sect was disreputable, but it.
Yes, I know, and the Horrott kept threatening me that I would go to hell if I did not change my mind and come to them in the sect and ask the Savior for forgiveness. She also harangued my parents several times, but my mum and dad did not listen to her rantings and simply walked away when Horrott made her attempts. However, when I was in year 4, she managed to win Hans free over to the sect as a teacher, but he then became one of those who continued to remain a member of the church in pretense. Together, the 2 of them then undertook.
We know that, because we were also able to fathom that. But what you did not know was that large sums of money flowed through the machinations of Mrs. Horrott, who hated you so much from your early adolescence that she left no stone unturned to have you beaten up by your teacher Free and this Rita Pavoni, and she also did this herself together with your teacher. But you always kept quiet about it to your parents and siblings, just as you also did nothing about the fact that you were treated like that, and as we discovered, you did not even thirst for retribution. And so it all continued. And the woman was also able to win over various persons in the local administration who, together with the woman and teaching Free, began to slander you and insult you as an evil and unteachable, which consequently began the development that is still being perpetuated today by successors of the sect fanatics. Basically, it turned out that the woman was able to induce very wealthy cult members to give large sums of money to harm you. As we have now been able to find out, up until 1973, the very wealthy members of the sect involved in this spent 1,714,010 francs to harm you and ultimately also to remove you from their lives. The money, as you say, brides, was paid at that time, mainly in the 1940s and 1950s, to various police officers, 4 home administrators, 3 court officials and 3 municipal officials to defame you, make you impossible and take you out of circulation, as was said when we asked around. It was decided to endanger your life in such a way as to make you lose it. This was first attempted when you were in India, where 2 private individuals were hired to secretly follow you and shoot you when the opportunity arose. This was also attempted when you were in Dog Hill for a conversation with Dr. Radhakrishnan, the President of India, as well as Mrs. Crystal Rogers and Mrs. Fisk. Fortunately, you were only hit in the left arm, which you still had at the time. In this respect, however, in other countries where you had worked or traveled through, every attempt was made to kill you, but fortunately every attempt failed. You then returned home from Greece, where you got married, after your long stay abroad, and later bought a house in Hinwil, where an attempt was made to shoot you through a window, but fortunately this was also unsuccessful. This attempt was made by Mrs. because the cult members were always after you to harm you or get rid of you. However, as this attempt also failed completely, 3 of the offending cult members tried to bribe the governor, Mr. who, however, resisted and stood by you and was very sympathetic to you. Consequently, he issued you with the necessary firearms license and also the firearms carrying license for your dangerous work. There.
Yes, I know, but none of what you found out regarding the bribes. I really did not know anything about that. That is crazy. Today it would be many times more, but that is no longer relevant or important. I also want to tell you that we usually use the word kickbacks when it comes to bribes. I then sold my house, an extension next to the museum in Hinwil, to the municipality when I was offered the house on Wacholdenstrasse, where I came into contact with Mrs. H. from Root, whose husband owned the Hinterschmadrudi farm, which was completely derelict, as was all the land around it, while the surrounding area had also been clear-cut and the forest totally cleared. I bought this farm, which I had known since I was an adolescent, from him via his wife, who made the deal with me. And then Mrs. tried to shoot me through the window on Wacholdenstrasse, which turned out to be a good thing. She was a markswoman, and that is exactly why she was commissioned to carry out the attempted murder by the fanatical cult members who still want to get rid of me today. Mrs. was a distant acquaintance of Algie Walder, who enlightened Mrs. when she came to her one day and complained that she had a guilty conscience. As Algie told me, Mrs. was with her for more than 7 hours and was horrified that she had allowed herself to be tempted to do something that was not right. It was only after about 4 hours that Mrs. told Algie who she had shot, and that is how she found out that I was supposed to be the victim. So she enlightened Mrs. that she knew me and that I was everything else that Mrs. had been told, as well as that I had nothing to do with UFOs, but had only been framed. So Algie opened Mrs. S. eyes, as we say, and told her that everything dated back to my early adolescence to the Horrid, who was a fanatical member of the sect, and belonged to it lock, stock, and barrel. The Horrid, I think, somehow found rich fanatical believers in the sect, to which Mrs. also belonged, who were in bondage to her and whom she could persuade to become her handmaidens and who formed a conspiratorial group. In my opinion, this must have been the case, as I assume, and this group has obviously survived to this day. Algie then told Mrs. something like this, whereupon she finally began to think for herself, and after several months slowly said goodbye to her faith and the sect, which she also managed to do after more than 3 years, and asked me for a conversation, told me everything and apologized. As a result, she changed her mind and came to me, but she was still afraid that I would report her to the police. Although Algie had told her that I certainly would not do that, because she could not understand that I was not seeking revenge, and so she accepted that I would inform the police after all. She only realized it when I really did not, because I am effectively not vengeful, because from an adolescent such an act simply seems more than just primitive and inhuman to me. I really do not think much of it. Which is why I also kept quiet from an adolescent age. Because talking would only bring strife and hatred instead of peace, which is what we can really hope for if we persistently keep quiet about this and that. That does not always work, but I still find no reason to retaliate, which would inevitably only bring new hatred and strife and even more evil enmity. The human beings of Earth should finally realize that not the negative and therefore not the evil, violent, destructive, annihilating, exterminating, criminal, murder and manslaughter, war and terror, revenge and retaliation, selfishness, greed for power, lies and slander, deceit and in general everything that is intransitive and pejorative and therefore everything that is not of the right creates true peace. But only strife, discord, evil hatred, agitation, threats, hostility and harassment. There is hatred and agitation as there was in the Middle Ages and, if possible, the stake, quartering, execution, strangulation, torture or the gallows etc. would still be used if this were still common practice today. Unfortunately, it is still the case that murders are committed and wars and terror are waged because of lies, slander, incitement and hatred, but also because of envy, greed and political skirmishes, such as religious beliefs, underhandedness, border violations, territorial claims, etc., as is currently the case in Ukraine, where Zelensky and Putin are waging war with their armies, murdering and destroying as much as they can. But the devil of war is also on the loose in Israel and Gaza, with the most evil being the mass murderer Netanyahu, who as a warlord surpasses everything in terms of human shamefulness with his pursuit of genocide. But the dictator of America, the mad Donald Trump, plays the leading role as a conniving or wielder, just like those in Germany who are neo-Nazis and supply weapons to the evil mass murderer Netanyahu with a lust for war, as well as partisan to the warmongering Zelensky in Ukraine, which is clearly angering Russia. However, in Germany, like practically all European states, is provoking another war that could spread across the whole of Europe through its lowly intelligent, brazen partisanship and low intelligence. The fact that Switzerland is now also to be taken into consideration because we have such idiots in our national government who have made a mockery of our neutrality and thereby created foreign enmity. Because with the consent of the co-governors in the EU dictatorship their sanctions against a foreign state were adopted and also applied against this foreign state, etc., may also take revenge in this way, who knows? And how further violations of neutrality will play out is written in the stars. And it really does not look good. But these neo-Nazi idiots do not realize this and are so lowly intelligent that they cannot even recognize that they are neo-Nazis in their thinking, decisions and actions, as Foth defined it. According to his meaning, and I think this is correct, he described those human beings as Nazis who are in favor of war, are partisan and also provide aid for war. Aid for war. He also coined the term non-thinking out of cynicism and idiocy, for the Nazi associated with human blood. But let me continue with what I actually want to say. If human beings are harassed by lies and slander and thus pilloried and publicly exposed, then there is no legal and moral help for them that would independently stand up for the human beings pilloried. Consequently, there is also no official help center that would endeavor to find the effective truth and clarify everything in order to end the whole thing of lies and slander, etc., and create true peace. So the only thing left for the slanderers to do is to demand retribution through the court system, namely by filing a lawsuit, which is then turned into a court case that ends with a warning, censure, reparation through compensation money, fines or punishment for the liars and slanderers. Of course, this in turn triggers enmity, hatred, revenge and retaliation, and so everything continues in the same old style. The result is the same as in a war, namely that after the end of the war there is only an enforced fake peace, which can be broken at any time by new open lies and slander and then continues. This is how it continues with any sham peace after a war. When the defeated become rebellious or new acts of war are taken up and everything continues in the old framework, perhaps by violating the orders of the victors in whole or in part. The fact is that the argument of freedom of expression, of being allowed to say anything, is unfortunately being exploited for lies, slander, agitation and hate speech, and consequently persons not involved in this, who hear about it, inevitably get involved and unleash vicious and hateful insults and comments against the slandered, insulting them and, if possible, harassing them not only with foul language but also with vicious assaults or damage to property. All human beings can be affected by this, and it can be ordinary people in the countryside or city dwellers, as well as known or unknown persons, as it is also irrelevant what they do for work and righteousness. In the thoughts, actions, and behavior of every wise human being, the value of his character, his attitude, and the constancy of his true human being are revealed and proven to the absolute. Therefore, it is absolutely not surprising that liars and slanderers are not categorized by fellow human beings as honest and not as true human beings, but as people of bad character and as rags of character, etc., who are neither trusted nor shown real and true friendship, but only a sham friendship, which is always only purposeful and is also not revealed as a unifying and true friendship. Lies and slander as well as hatred and agitation find their victims and allies everywhere. Consequently, every person, every community or organization, an open society or authority, etc., can be exposed to hostility and harm through lies and slander, etc. This is the case in Switzerland and also everywhere on earth, in all countries, in rural areas, mountains and cities, etc. However, people who do not worry about this truth or allow themselves to be irritated do not realize how miserable they are. And unfortunately, this applies to the majority of humanity. So it can be said that the majority of the world or human beings live in fear and cowardice, as does that part of the people in the world that does not realize that America and the whole world is heading towards a dictatorship through the dictator Trump, the like of which has never been seen on earth before. Trump supporters in America and the butt fiddlers of those rulers of all countries on earth, unfortunately. This also includes Swiss rulers, who, out of fear, devotion, and cowardice, are filling their trousers in front of dictator Trump, have obviously still not realized what is actually going on and what is coming with this dictator. It is effectively incomprehensible that the part of Trump supporters in America does not realize what is actually being played and is not anxious to depose this madman. How the rulers of the world do not put a stop to him and let him run into the void, which would not be so difficult if these rulers of the world did not fill their trousers with low intelligence, fear, and cowardice. But it is also the case that when the people revolt because something stinks in the land of Bohemia, and something goes wrong with what the rulers are doing and they demonstrate against it, then the rulers use their might and send in the police and the army to stifle the honorable protest of the people. And so that this flourishes and the rulers can retain their unjust might, and since the people do not get their rights, at least the righteous who also demonstrate against injustice, they are still obliged to pay taxes, from which the police and army deployed against them are probably paid again, as well as the morbidly idiotic armament of the army, which can possibly wage war and bring murder and destruction, and also misery, hardship and suffering over their own or a foreign country. But to say anything is pointless, especially in the case of those who, in Svath's judgment, are Nazis. It is also these people with this kind of mindset who are pathologically bent on revenge and retribution, etc., as I mentioned earlier. Nat.
Speak no further, for your rational thinking and actions are difficult for Earth humans to comprehend, namely for all those who are to be judged according to being Nazi-like, as you say. Also, if it is indeed as you say, especially regarding revenge and retribution, and besides.
Yes, I know, but I guess that is not to be changed. I learned from my parents and from your grandfather Svath that revenge and retribution really do not bring anything good, but only trouble, strife and hatred, revenge and retribution again, and ultimately also murder and manslaughter, war, terror, destruction, annihilation, genocide and all kinds of evil. And everything has become even worse since then. since futuristic technology was suddenly able to be scaled up, in particular through electronics and its undreamt of possibilities, and now even further through elementary science, through the Higgs boson fields discovered in 2012 at the CERN Nuclear Research Center in Geneva. Unfortunately, the findings from this will also be used again for many negative things. Everything has already become worse and worse in terms of the destruction of the Earth and all its fauna and flora. And this will become even worse due to the greed for power, irrationality, and stubbornness of human beings. And that this has been going on since time immemorial, as we have countless proof of since time immemorial. Mainly wars and terror, as is currently the case in Ukraine, where the war fanatic Zelensky, who is truly hated in his own country, and the obviously vengeful Putin, are organizing murder and destruction. And the fact that the partisan Western states feel sorry for Ukraine and its population, and only constantly report on the evils of the murder and destruction being carried out there by the Russians, while the same events are being carried out by the Ukrainians in Russia, which are deliberately kept quiet, is not taken into account. Just as it is also happening in Gaza, where the mass murderer Netanyahu is massacring the Palestinians without being bloodied and put behind bars. And the fact that hegemonistic America is infamously working in the background to ensure that there is a great deal of death and destruction does not seem to matter to the world. Probably because fear and cowardice are greater than reason and peace, which the dictator in America is currently making a mockery of with the knowledge of the world. This, as practically in all European countries at the forefront at the evil and nasty top are all those who, as neo-Nazi equals of the German government, are doing everything to ensure that the Ukraine war degenerates and ultimately affects the whole of Europe. Because all these neo-Nazi government idiots are provokingly doing everything to ensure that the war degenerates across the whole of Europe. If these stupid heads do not come to their senses and do not finally refrain from their partisan behavior towards the warmongers and war fanatics, Zelensky and Ukraine respectively, as is also the case with the war in Israel and Gaza and the mass murder Netanyahu, then things will really come to a head. The fact that dictator Trump is still hegemonistically playing his dirty games in Ukraine and Israel/Gaza is obviously not being realized by all of Europe's rulers, who are therefore cowering in fear and cowardice before this absolutely uninhibited dictatorial maniac instead of standing up to him. But enough of that, so let us get back to what was mentioned earlier, for it was in India, in Morali, that I also met Phobal Chong at the Ashoka Ashram on Gurgan Road. She was still a child at the time and often saw me when I was walking around with Askit, who was the liaison person to Uplearan at the time and was appointed by you for this purpose. I was shot there on Dog Hill, and Dr. Radhakrishnan personally drove me to the police, where a police report was written, which I still have today and which Bernadette also photographed. The hatred against me also continued to run rampant in the parish office of my home parish of Bulak, because the sectarians there also apparently continued to denigrate me. Because when I visited my godmother, who had a bicycle shop, she said that she had also been drawn over to their side by sect members, and she condemned me while praising my brothers Gottlieb and Karl to the skies. When I stupidly told her that I still had to go to the municipal office to get a letter of authentication, she probably phoned there. Because when I went there, they refused to give me what I needed, insulted me, threw me a 500-franc note and said dismissively that the devil was coming for me and that I should make my way to him quickly anyway. And since then the theater has continued, with others apparently also being dragged into it. Because the whole thing goes on. Because this year alone there have been 2 attempts. It has now been attempted 28 times from this side. And it has cracked worse than a thunderclap. Was an experience for everyone in the center. Barbara was just in the chicken yard, Eva at the window in the kitchen, as was Jacobus. Bernadette was in the toilet and Madeline in her room, while I was at the front door and saw a head-sized piece of metal crash down onto the concrete and fly away. So there have already been 2 remarkable incidents this year alone. The first one behind the shed was so loud that Bernadette also heard it in her den and was startled. Then it was about 1 day later when Jacobus and Pius were at the front of the biotope and saw 2 large drones and watched them for a long time. as about 3 weeks later 2 large drones were circling over the hill to the north, which after a while whizzed past the center and disappeared. Bernadette also heard their buzzing noises. Then, it was only recently, as I told you, that Pius and I observed a spherical UFO in a westerly direction, and now shortly afterwards Barbara also saw one flying towards the north. I am beginning to wonder what they suddenly want here, because we have nothing to do with them, even if I am stupidly called UFO Meier and really never had anything to do with UFOs. You Pleuron also have nothing to do with them, and besides, for me your flying apparatus are not UFOs, but beamships as you call them yourselves. I wonder what the UFOs want here in our area, because we really have nothing to do with them. And whether or not the military with its stupid radar system on the mountain opposite was able to detect these and the drones. That will probably also remain one of the military secrets. Like many other things. Such as the fact that helicopters keep flying closer or further around our center. Just as military personnel have also been roped down into the forest by helicopters, which has been filmed and photographed by American visitors. Also back then, when I was concreting with Guido and a UFO flew just over the Bloodhound missile station on the mountain above, that was around 50 years ago, nothing was announced. Instead we were harassed by the military for years. On foot and also with military cars and more recently for years with helicopters and military men hanging on ropes below mysteriously. But it does not matter. This is Barbara's report.
Sighting.
Monday, 15th September 2025 was a beautiful late summer day. It had rained during the night and in the morning everything looked fresh and clean. The visibility was fantastic and the contours of the landscape looked razor sharp. The westerly wind was blowing quite briskly and pushed the impressive cloud formations across the blue sky. In the afternoon, I stood on the balcony at Hinterschmadruti to watch the 2 kites soaring high above and performing wonderful aerial maneuvers. There were also many aeroplanes either approaching or departing from Cloton Airport. High above an approaching aircraft, there was a flash of something that I automatically recognized as an aircraft flying over Switzerland. Although this thing was really far away or relatively small, its shape somehow irritated me because it was not elongated like that of an aeroplane. In addition, unlike the aircraft, it seemed to be trailing a short vapor trail. To get a better idea of what was moving in the sky, I quickly fetched the binoculars. After some searching, I discovered a shiny silver, almost spherical object in which the sunlight was reflected. From the underside of the object, an elongated path led downwards which did not seem to be made of metal, but rather appeared flaky, milky, and translucent. I had probably seen this part as a contrail without binoculars. Somehow the object reminded me of a kind of jellyfish. It moved evenly in a northeasterly direction, and when I took down the binoculars after about 1 minute at approx. 14.37 HRS, I could no longer recognize it with the naked eye. Barbara, Switzerland.
So, do you know anything about that? I mean about the UFOs? My question also relates to the fact that in my opinion, there are probably also such drones flying around in the various states of the north. And I think that private individuals could also be involved, who would all the more like to cause another war to Ozarton.
No, you know we do not deal with that, and furthermore our directives forbid it.
Of course, I know that it was just a question, but I still have one because I was asked by Jacobus about what happened in the past, which I have effectively forgotten. But he was able to prove to me what had happened in the first few years by holding the witness book under my nose, in which much is written down that had effectively happened and which had already been forgotten many times.
I read this work Zugenbuch with great interest, and it is really very interesting what is listed in it.
It is, but the preco. This is the one thing that we would probably better not say anything about. Though. Because it would be denied anyway and also trigger revenge. As well as causing renewed strife and offense against the Figu and me. Because it is enough with all the malicious things that have been done against us for around 50 years for it to finally bear fruit, to be ostracized from the Toss Valley as a denier of religion. But as I said, it would not be wise to talk about it openly, but regarding the book by D. Have you read this slanderous work in the meantime, which you have photographed, and if so, what do you say about it?
There is nothing good to be said about this work of lies, for it is an evil game of monstrous slander. But for the sake of truth, I will comment on this evil work of lies and cite what is recorded by us. The whole thing in this book is evil, and it is an unparalleled work of lies. And that Methuselah is involved in it with unparalleled lies, and even more evil slanderous lies, is not to be understood by me or by the others. Just as it is also not to be understood that he wishes you evil without you having done something wrong to him. The whole of this testifies to a very abysmal vindictiveness which I.
To this I know, namely that he was and apparently remained pissed off at me, and this only because I did not agree with him about Charles Darwin, namely because he had filed bones to prove his theses. He traveled with a bang, because he is a fanatical Darwin fan, which is why he simply took off at the drop of a hat and did not even say goodbye. But that he would seek revenge because I had brought up the Darwin issue was something he mentioned in passing when he left. Once Bernadette was also present during one of his visits, but the conversation with him was good and pleasant, but when he turned up again, I was unfortunately alone with him and told him about Darwin. That he only turned up here at the center was perhaps a calculation, because I later found out that he was in contact with my ex, as was also the case later, as I was told, where he apparently also met Methuselah. My ex also swore vile revenge on me because I clearly told her that I wanted a divorce. Because she wanted me. One day she would probably also. Furthermore, and this was extremely important, Eva came into my life in 1978, and she was and is exactly the opposite of the malicious and vengeful nature of my ex's entire being. Eva's character and nature filled me with well-being from the very first moment, so I felt good and comfortable around her. And as it turned out, it was the same with Eva towards me, which very quickly led to us joining forces and also openly and honestly explaining this to my ex. I also told her that I was getting divorced and no longer wanted to live with her. She stubbornly resisted the divorce. So everything continued in the same old way, but I separated from her and the bed, after which it was around mid-1995 or so. She simply left without a word, and I did not know where. This was until one day I was confronted with the fact that she had moved into a newly built flat in Turbenthal, where she had caused around 20,000 Swiss francs worth of damage within a month, which I was supposed to pay to the owner, Mrs., but I refused to do so. I was told that my ex had joined a sect and had lied through her teeth, but I can neither confirm this nor call it untrue or give any other opinion on the matter. I only kept hearing that she was swearing at me in some places and denigrating me. Well, it was she herself who finally filed for divorce, which was finalized on August 14, 1997. Unfortunately, my lawyer was not as clever as her lawyer, so I had to pay her a lot of money as a result of her lies. Partly because she cheekily lied that I had stolen all her money and that I had used a large sum of her money to set up the garage as a workshop. But in truth she had no money, because she was poor from her parents' house. Just as she also did not have a cent of savings when she worked in Wetzikon in the kitchen of the restaurant, where she often went from our kitchens. And there, Bernadette can also testify to that, and that.
This is known to me from the records of Ta, so what you say is correct. But what Ascot, and especially Sim Yase and Ta, specifically wrote about family life, I have really studied everything in detail that they fathomed. This, as I also experienced in this regard everything that I personally experienced during the time of my contact with you, as I also experienced further and realized that from the very beginning in Thessaloniki, Neoiepivates, in Corinthos, and then here at home, only calculating hypocrisy was shown to you. The only reason you got married was to get away from Greece and live in a wealthy country. True love was only a pretense. which unfortunately you never noticed and hoped that everything would be all right after all, and that her good and wrong would give way after all. Until you finally realized that everything was hopeless and your senses were opened when Eve appeared. As for everything concerning your dealings and behavior with your family, for which I have also studied very carefully the records of Simyase and Ta, as well as the very revealing writing of Methuselah, who together with Bernadette produced an open word, which says exactly the opposite of what he claims in the book of D, proves that this work of slander is effectively the most evil of slander and the most malicious of lies of many kinds that Methuselah, Urex and D could think up and fantasize together. What is allegedly lied about here in this book's unrivaled work of lies seems so primitive to us that
it is not worth doing anything about it, which does not correspond to my sense anyway, because these two underexposed liars do not even deserve that I would do something against their hair-raising lies and slander, if I were vindictive, because that would make them feel even more confirmed in their lightning stupidity.
that would indeed be so in their low intelligence, because they are not capable of thinking that far. But I will say that Methuselah should just think for a moment about the fact that as a great businessman, he was not even able to keep the garage workshop he ran debt-free, and could not pay more than 130,000 francs in debt, which you then settled for him, so that he would not have got into even bigger trouble than he was already in.
I did not really want to talk about that. Although everything in the D book corresponds to a very nasty, disparaging slander of an unparalleled kind, it still does not tempt me to retaliate and say more than what I have already said.
But then I want you to write what I have said when I dictate. There would be more to say, like what is going on in the garage in Wetzikon.
That is enough, do not go on, because it is really enough.
You are too forgiving, my friend. I, like Bermunda, and Jana and Florina, also feel the need for you to attach to our conversation what I have photographed from Methuselah's computer, because it is very important to all of us that those human beings who have received or bought this mendacity from this D, and from Methuselah know the truth. What Simyase and Ta have listed in their notes corresponds to what Methuselah has openly and clearly stated in his detailed explanation, and what he has written together with Bernadette, because both have described and also mentioned your family lives in great detail, that your wife beat your children and above all very often insulted them, as well as you, who have never argued in your life, even if you have raised your voice when necessary and become loud, as you still do today when necessary, but you do not get excited, do not argue, do not get angry, and do not get angry. This while you have thus held back in this regard, and moreover, you have also not been offered a chance to interfere despite your interventions, because you have never been offered this chance.
Yes, unfortunately that was the case. But the letter in collaboration with Bernadette, there is really no need for it to be added to our conversation. Besides, everything had probably already been listed once in a contact report. Note Bernadette, see Pleiadian Pleiran Contact Reports, Block 23, 901st Contact Report, Wednesday, October 30, 2024, page 189 FF. And what you say about my being loud, that is already the case, but it is not simply a being loud, it is a shouting. Just say it correctly, because that is what it really is, but sometimes, unfortunately, every decent word is useless, but only when there is a roar. Unfortunately, you cannot always just stay calm, you are forced to be loud or even shout, but without arguing anger or rage. My father never shouted, because he was always careful to remain gentle, and my father always acted in this way, which unfortunately meant he was often disregarded. He never raised his hand to us children, whereas Mum was different, but that never made me hate or judge her. Perhaps she learnt nothing else at home, but I do not know, because I never asked her about it. Despite the beatings, we always had a good relationship until her death, as we also did with her father. However, It is incomprehensible to me that Methuselah has suddenly thrown down the gauntlet after years and told such outrageous lies. The whole thing is incomprehensible to me, because it is simply not plausible to me that he should have told such a pack of lies. If he did, then there was probably revenge behind it and also evil influence and over-snoring to the whole pack of lies, which was only invented by whom I can imagine, but I cannot prove it, to discredit me and get me on the edge and freak me out. But that does not work, because it only causes me to feel sorry for those who have to invent such stupid, horrible, and evil lies in order to polish up their demolished, destroyed self-esteem, which they do not succeed in doing, but instead creates hatred in them and produces more and more lies, which also become omnipresent and a habit in daily life. However, fellow human beings remain silent and know where the rabbit lies, remain silent and pretend to believe the lies in order to then withdraw. But if they do not, then they are probably of the same nature as the liars, which confirms the principle, birds of a feather flock together.
I have never heard that saying in that wise, but it actually points out what you were saying. And in repetition of all that has already been said and discussed, I would like to repeat again what proves to me that the regrettable and entire earth-wide lies, and the deception and slander of the hatred of sick earth humans, the tremendous malicious attacks against you since your youth by various authorities, institutions, clinics, homes, and even by police bodies and various organizations, but also by military and intelligence forces of various states is disgusting. As I know from my personal and absolutely certain research, which I have also carried out in my own interest, you were, as Arlian also found out through his research into all the many incidents at the time of your adolescence, insulted very early on by lies and deceit as a result of your early rejection of everything religious. Also, when you were already in contact with Sfath, my grandfather, you continued to be persecuted by lies and a fanatical sectarian conspiracy group, which was basically arranged by Mrs. Horrod and a fourth-grade teaching, Emmer Fry. Later, when you worked abroad and also moved around, everything was done and undertaken to spread malicious lies against you in Swiss consular levels in many states, triggered by the hatred of the fallible members of the Christian sectarian community, to which Mrs. Horrod belonged, and from which she also gained very wealthy and also very fanatical members who became hateful towards you. The malicious work against you has spread through the efforts of this act has spread to some consulates belonging to Switzerland, so that wherever you have also traveled, for example in Damascus and Syria, in Istanbul and Turkey, in Pakistan and in India, etc., you have been treated very unkindly, as I've been able to find out. I was very disappointed by the Christian actions and actions of the authorities or other official bodies in your home community against you, as I also am today with regard to the authorities of the community and the canton where you settled and set up the center. The old-fashioned attempts are still being made, as they have always been for you in your life, and are still partly so today. Lies and deceit on all sides have also affected you since MJ's made contact with you, and you were allowed to take the photos and films of our beamships. The worldwide campaign of lies against you, which continues to this day, and will continue for a long time to come, began not only on the part of the authorities, intelligence services, and the military. From America in particular, a great deal has been done since the beginning of the contacts to accuse you of lying and deception, as is done in this book by this D, which was also demonstrably manufactured with the help of Methuselah's lies, as well as those of your former wife. In Switzerland, too, you are denigrated by persons who do not believe the truth, but are open to lies against you, as are so-called ufologists and the like worldwide. In this regard, there is even talk of, but I do not want to say anything more about that. Throughout your life you have been denied the truth of your openness and righteousness, and accused of dishonest deception, which you defenselessly endure and...
Enough, for there is really no need for you to say more. All that has been said is more than necessary. For me, everything is over and long forgotten, so there is really no need to say any more about it. There are plenty of other things we can talk about, such as the fact that the majority of Earth humans are becoming increasingly lowly intelligent and primitive. For example, in the wise insistence that the gender of participants in all kinds of sport should now be determined. Besides the fact that in politics these days, lying has become so abysmal that it permeates the whole Earth and comes out the other side and disappears into space.
That is indeed the case. But now, dear friend, as you see here, I am called and have to go, and it seems to be in a hurry. Farewell and goodbye.
Well then, goodbye, Quetzal.